Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John Dehlin, and my co-host is
Margi Dehlin.
And we are very, very excited to have you join us for another edition of Mormon Stories Live Podcast, where we focus on practical issues with the panel. So Mormon Stories does single interviews that are long form, and then we also sometimes have panels to discuss interesting issues. It's part of what we've been calling our Mormon Transitions series. It is March 28th, 2017, and today we have a very exciting topic for all of you. It's being Mormon and single and how sexuality interfaces with that. We're going to be covering, having never been married in Mormon and being single and sexuality, and we're also going to cover sort of sexuality after divorce as a single Mormon or post-Mormon. Before we jump into that, we want to just have a few quick announcements. I want to remind you guys that we have a workshop coming up in Fort Collins, Colorado, May 4th through 5th. It's going to be fun and meaningful, and we're going to help a lot of people. If you're interested in that, or we have a retreat coming up in Salt Lake City, June 23rd through 25th. That's going to be amazing. And then we have a workshop July 7th, 2017 on healthy relationships and healthy sexuality with our very own Natasha Helfer-Parker. And I think Kristin Benyon is going to be there as well. I'm not sure. Kristin, are you going to be it? Yes or no? No, just Natasha? She doesn't know. Okay. So regardless, check out mormontransitions.org/events, and you can check out our event calendar. We would love to have you guys support us. We want to thank everyone who donates to Mormon Stories, Mormon Transitions, A Thoughtful Faith, Mormon Matters. Please know that your donations make all this possible. If you have been enjoying this series, please do support it because your donations make it possible. Just $10 or $20 a month on a recurring basis can keep this sort of thing alive. So please donate. It's really easy. You can do it with credit card. You can do it over PayPal, however you want. We want to encourage you, if you have ideas for topics, if you have comments on past episodes, if you have ideas for future guests, please email us at mormonstories@gmail.com, and we would love to entertain your ideas. If you're listening to this interview now on Facebook, please feel free to post comments or questions on the live stream on the Mormon Stories Podcast Facebook page, and we can incorporate your comments and questions into our live discussion. That makes these things fun. And then if you're not comfortable doing that, you can email your questions or comments anonymously to mormonstories@gmail.com, and we would love to incorporate them into current or future shows. Okay, so that is enough with the introductions. How are you feeling today?
Good. I'm excited for today's topic.
You are?
Yeah, how about you?
Is that because you're planning on becoming single soon?
No.
No? So why the
No.
excitement, Margi?
Well,
I'm
I have
kidding.
2 daughters that are
That's true.
navigating
That's
these
true.
waters right
We
now.
do have 2 single Mormon daughters. 3, actually. All right. Well, sort of Mormon. All right. So let's begin, and let's introduce our illustrious panel. We are really excited to have them today. So we have 4 people joining us today. The first is Kristin Benyon. Kristin has been on Mormon Stories, Mormon Transitions in the past. She's helped us out with retreats and workshops. Kristin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
My name is Kristin Marie.
Okay, Kristin, go ahead. You're muted. Try that again.
My name is Kristin Marie Benyon. I think we're supposed to say I'm a practicing therapist, sex therapist in Orem, Utah. I don't practice there. Working primarily with a lot of couples and singles around sexuality issues all along the spectrum of belief in Mormonism. And I live in Bluffdale, and I have a dog who's awesome. His name's Murphy.
Oh, cute name too.
Yeah.
And you're single.
Yes, I am. Well, I think so. Yeah, I am.
And you've
Just
dated.
kidding. What?
And you've dated.
I have dated. Yes, I have a history there. Yeah.
Okay, so you're both an interviewee and an expert.
I'm wearing a couple hats.
All right. Well, welcome, Kristin. It's always great to have you.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Michelle Ross. Michelle Michelle is a moderator of a very important group. But Michelle, why don't you introduce yourself and then tell us about the group you moderate?
Yeah, hi. I am Michelle and I live in Salt Lake City. I work in healthcare operations. So my company contracts with hospital systems to go in and help them run their revenue cycle, just, increase revenue, cut costs, improve processes. And I've been doing that for a number of years. And then, like John was saying, I'm one of the moderators for Single Mormon Transitions, which is a group started by John Dehlin about a year ago. It's almost been a year, not quite a year. And if anybody is interested in, joining that group, it's a secret group right now. So you kind of have to go through we have a landing page, a landing site where you can go to on Facebook called Single Mormon Transitions landing page and ask to join there. I don't have any dogs, no animals. So.
Well, we're happy to have you, Michelle. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Paul Smith, this is your first time, I think, on Mormon Stories podcast. Correct me if I'm wrong, but please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Paul Smith. I'm a personal injury attorney in Fresno, California. I'm divorced, 3 kids. In my spare time, I like to go to concerts and go to Mormon transitions retreats. So that's what I do in my spare time.
Thanks for the plug. We'll pay you later. Name your 3 favorite concerts you've ever attended.
That would be Paul McCartney. I just saw 21 Pilots, which was awesome. And probably seeing Dave Matthews was probably a pinnacle because he's really cool.
All right.
Mana. No, I'd have to say Mana's up there too. There's too many. Mana.
All right. Well, Paul, it's good to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here. Thanks.
All right. And to round off our panel, we have Ryan Stott. Ryan, tell us a bit about yourself.
I'm very excited to be here. Just as Margi was saying, I think this is an exciting topic. I don't think it's been talked about enough. So this is fun for me. This is the first time I've been on a podcast. I live here in Salt Lake City. I think I was invited on this episode because I do have a lot of experience being single, both within the Mormon church and then after believing in the Mormon church. So that's kind of what I'm planning on talking about today. When I'm not spending a lot of time listening to podcasts, I spend a lot of time up in the mountains, do a lot of climbing and snowboarding, and professionally I do a lot of e-commerce and software work.
Oh.
All right, Ryan. Well, it's great to have you. Thanks for joining us. We want to welcome all our listeners. We've already got 75 listeners on Mormon Stories live up on Facebook. That's actually, I think, a record for these panel type discussions that are Mormon transitions themed. There are a couple comments I'll list. Jana writes Margi with lips. So Margi, she writes, Margi. So Jana's excited to have you here.
Thanks, Jana.
Jana also doesn't like my Easter colors. So thank you, Jana, for your feedback. Several people, it's their first time to tune in. Holly writes, I really love the last podcast with Kristin. So Kristin, you got a shout out from Holly. And it looks like our daughter Maya has joined us. So that's good, right? Mm-hmm. Hi, Maya. All right. So we're ready to begin. And this is going to be a fun topic. And let's just dive right in. So being single and Mormon and sexuality, that is a really interesting topic. So Michelle, I think you came to us wanting to really talk about this topic. Why don't we just start, and I'd like to have you on for your own sort of Mormon Stories episode, but talk about your first introduction to being single and sexuality. And I'm guessing that it doesn't start with actually dating. It probably starts with messages you received as a youth growing up in the church.
Yeah, that's the perfect segue into what I wanted to talk about. I think I had contacted you and I had contacted Kristin because, like Ryan had said earlier, I just don't feel like this topic gets enough airtime. I think singles are kind of pushed to the side in the church, and even kind of in a post-Mormon context, it's almost like they're in a different world. They're not quite part of it all. So for me, I was last night I was trying to think of some talking points for this subject and this topic. And I think I actually looked up the Strength of Youth pamphlet and reread it and was shocked all over again, just at some of the things it says. And so just to kind of briefly summarize some of the things that it says, it says never do anything that could lead to sexual transgression. Treat others with respect, not as objects used to satisfy lustful and selfish desires, as though lust or sexual desires are selfish. Before marriage, do not participate in passionate kissing. Do not lie on top of another person. Don't touch the private sacred parts of another person's body with or without clothing. Avoid situations that invite increased temptation. And do not participate in discussions that arouse sexual feelings. And then I was really shocked to see this because I assumed that in 2017 this would have been removed from the pamphlet, but it still says that the Prophet Alma taught that sexual sins are more serious than any other sins except murder or denying the Holy Ghost. So this thing that is so much a part of human nature and so much a part of, you can't, the pamphlet is telling you to be asexual, but humans aren't typically asexual. So, I think
Michelle, tell us about in your youth, how those messages got kind of translated to you and how you internalized them.
I took it very seriously. I think
Were you raised in Utah?
I was raised in Utah. I actually was raised in a part member family, so I have kind of a unique story and situation on that, on one hand, but my own personal desire was to be very much a part of the church and very much active. And, I subscribed to the Strength of Youth pamphlet and I completely followed it. I felt like there was definitely, it was very important to keep those rules. I'm a rule follower, to top it all off. So, I don't know. I think I did internalize it. I don't think I struggled with it really until probably my mid to late 20s. I really started to question it. I think it was easy for me.
Let me ask about that. So, and then we want to jump to some others as well. Others be thinking about if or how you internalize the messages of the church or the For Strength of the Youth pamphlet as a youth. But Michelle, is it fair to say, if we're trying to be balanced, that maybe for the Strength of the Youth pamphlet and the church messages around sexuality kept you safe or clean or kept you out of trouble? Now, those are all loaded words, but I'm just saying, was that all bad for you? Was there anything good about that for you?
No. And I think,
there was nothing good, or
no,
yes,
there was definitely good associated with that. I think.
What was the good?
Like you said, no teen pregnancy, no STDs, no STIs, no, maybe emotional baggage that I wasn't prepared to handle at that young age. So yes, absolutely. I think a lot of parents would probably prefer their teenagers not to have sex, like maybe wait until you're in your 20s, maybe you wait until you're more mature. I think it had a lot of positives, but the way it's portrayed, it's not an option. It's a sin like unto murder. It's not portrayed as this is for your health and your benefit and out of love. And, but I just had a conversation the other day with a friend, and we said, in a way, we feel kind of lucky because we didn't have to maybe go through some of the sexual mistakes that people make in their teens and early 20s when they aren't quite ready to make those decisions. So yeah, there were some positives. Absolutely.
Okay, good. So for you, there weren't really any problems until you're around 28. Is that fair to say?
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Thanks for admitting that. All right, Ryan, how about for you? Talk about actually, before we go to Ryan, Kristin, let's do women then men just for this question. So Kristin, for you, up until what point did the church's messages about sexuality work for you versus not?
Yeah. I think for Strength of Youth, it created, well, when I was younger, I never, ever perceived that it was harmful or not loaded with some pretty shaming messaging. And also, the way I perceive the Strength of Youth pamphlet now. I have an interesting, so I went to two BYU schools, so it was kind of, that messaging was carried through with the honor code for me, through undergrad and graduate school. So there's some layers there of single sexuality and kind of consequences that could actually come from violating those things. And I say violating because that's the language used in those types of things. So I similarly didn't really start saying, "Ooh, that's just not super healthy." I think I felt it in my heart, in my beginning 20s, but not till about 25 and definitely later 20s, where I was saying, why are we being compared as functioning full adults, given the same kind of roadmap as children are? Right. And there's no one talking about it. So I think that's kind of a deferred thing from leadership to say, well, just follow the For Strength of Youth pamphlet.
So is it safe to say that for you, the church's messages on sexuality, it felt like they worked for quite some time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
At least up until 18. Yeah.
Okay. So 18 for you, it started going awry. Okay.
Started getting, yeah.
Okay, Paul. Now, sorry, Ryan. Talk about whether the church's sexual messages affected you in your teen years.
It absolutely affected me. In fact, I'd say it was, for me, quite a bit earlier than what the two ladies have already described.
How's that? How did it affect you?
I remember being 13 years old, and already I'm having non-member friends who are having sex and telling me about it. And it's like, okay, wow. I'm already not even planning on having any sex until I'm at least after a mission. I'm into my 20s. I'm trying not to even think about it. All of a sudden, I've got friends who are doing it, telling me about it. And so, it's in my face at a very early, young age. So, out of the gate, I also read the For Strength of Youth in preparation for this too. And I was kind of going through thinking of all this. I was like, you know what, at our core selves, we are basically genetic replicators. We're sexual beings, or even talked about in previous podcasts, some people are asexual. They don't have a drive for sex. That's fine. But for the majority of us, we're pre-programmed for reproduction. And it is a very powerful thing, and it drives a lot of things we do. So at an early age, I'm exposed to this. You start thinking about it a lot. You start having feelings and emotions. You go to church activities and you're getting aroused. It's constantly something that's, always at the forefront of your mind. So I wish I didn't start thinking about it until I was later in my 20s, but that definitely wasn't the case for me.
And then how did that negatively affect you at all as a teen?
I don't know. Well, kind of like Michelle said, there's some good things that go around it. Some people get into it early and fast, and maybe they have bad experiences. Maybe they, get a lot of unneeded drama in their lives.
But I'm talking about you. I'm talking about you. How about you?
Yeah. For me, it wasn't that big of an issue. I always just kind of put myself on, hey, look, I'm on the path. I'm good. I'll worry about it later. I just try to suppress, ignore it. It was tough. You have these sexual urges that are suppressed when you're very young. But for me, it wasn't that big of an issue. It was a challenge, but it wasn't that difficult, to be honest.
Okay. All right. So far, 3 out of 4. I mean, Ryan, you're saying that it was hard because you were hearing about other people's sexual experiences, but overall, the church's messages on sexuality didn't torment you as a teen.
Did torment me. It was a challenge, a little bit of maybe kind of a non-standard road that other people outside of the church didn't follow, but it wasn't that difficult as a teen.
Okay. And is it fair to say it kept you out of trouble?
I'd say it did. Yeah, I didn't get involved with girls I shouldn't have. No one wanted pregnancies and, no diseases or anything like that. So, I mean, there are some good things that came out of it.
Okay. All right, Paul, how about you?
So I think my experience was similar to Ryan's. I dated only Mormon girls, and very good Mormon girls. So I while I certainly saw it everywhere, and my friends had Playboys or whatever, and sex was around me, due to the Mormon Church, I was never really, I never really succumbed to that pressure, because I was always with my Mormon friends, and that's something the Mormon Church does really well. Is it kept me inside that nest for far too long. I think is the ultimate end result, is that the damage, you start acting out later on in life.
Got it. Okay. Well, go ahead.
Okay, so I have a question just to follow up, because I'm curious. So in growing up as teens, how many of you, so did you have sexual feelings? Do you feel like you were awake to that in your teens? And was there shame associated when you did? Or do you feel like it was kind of like a structure that almost sort of prevented the awareness around sexual feelings to have any shame? Was there a shame element? Do you remember feeling sexual things as a teen? And how did you feel about that when you did?
I personally do not recall ever feeling shame, but I mean, you asking the question is making me think about it. I can't remember ever feeling shame at all. It was just what it was. I was not awake.
Yep. Margi, I actually feel that same way. When I was a teenager, I wouldn't say that it was an issue. I know that for a lot of people, they had a lot of sexual feelings as a teenager. And I don't know if it was because it was the church or it was just my group of friends. That wasn't really an option. And so it wasn't really something that I maybe thought about, or even, it wasn't a problem for me at all. Maybe, there were some times in my late teens when I was dating some people where, it definitely, I definitely felt awakened, I guess you could say. But overall, I was safe in that net, and I didn't really have those feelings, or I don't know. Mm-hmm.
It sounds like all four of you kind of stayed morally clean. Okay, Ryan, go ahead.
I'm going to maybe disagree a little bit. I did feel some shame when I was a teenager. Maybe I wasn't, going out and having sex, but even like you're taught as, hey, even the thought of sex is bad. And even like, looking at an image wrong, or, doing something wrong, I did start to feel some shame. And I think we'll talk about more and more about this as this episode progresses. But I did feel some of that early on, even, as a young teenager. I was like, oh my gosh, they're talking about porn all the time. And if I even look at something wrong, is this porn? What is porn? Mm-hmm. And I did start to feel some of that shame at an early age.
Right.
Excellent. Christine, were you going to say something? You got to unmute. Just a second, Kristen. You have to unmute.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, I got you.
There you go.
I remember feeling both. I remember being very aware of an awakening sexuality within me, and embracing that and really enjoying it, especially through expression of like music. It could feel like this was a part of being alive. And I remember really liking that. And then in the case of where shame would come into place for me was through kind of purity culture messages and ecclesiastical interviews of worthiness interviews. And so there was a real conflict there for me of holding both awarenesses, that this is bad, this is not good, this is going to ruin me, these thoughts at this age or whatnot. But this feels a lot. I feel alive. Like I feel like this is not harming me. Mm-hmm. So
how'd those come out in the interviews?
Well, a lot of deferring to authority for what was okay. As a young,
like what?
Female, like asking if what was going on within me was okay, and then having consequences follow. So that was kind of shaming and not promoting of my sexual development at all.
So you had bishops or leaders that would make you feel, that would give you consequences for the feelings you had?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
What types of consequences?
Don't take the sacrament. don't go to the temple with your peers.
For thoughts?
Well, yeah, and some behaviors.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, cool. Michelle, why don't you talk to us about when things started going not so good?
Well, for me, and it might be different than for a lot of people. Like I said, I was a rule follower, and I didn't have a problem, like for most of my 20s. It's not that I was keeping the Strength of Youth pamphlet guidelines. I think that I was kind of a nuanced Mormon in a lot of ways and had my own idea of what was or wasn't okay, but definitely wasn't crossing the line, in having sex. And I think that for me, it really wasn't until I was about 30, maybe 30, 31, I had been dating somebody and we broke up, and I was really sad about it. And I remember it really is what started my whole faith transition, because I started questioning everything. I really started a soul search, and I started to think a lot about the law of chastity, and if it was necessary. And I started to feel like I couldn't understand, here I am, I'm like a 30-year-old and I'm still living like I'm 12 years old. And so why, does God really care about that? Does he really care if you care about somebody? If does he care if you have a sexual experience with them? And so, anyway, that was the catalyst for me. It was really sexuality that led me out of the church, I think. And, led me. And of course, there's all these other things that came along the way, but that's when it went awry for me. And I got to the point, and well, I had an interesting experience. So after I had broken up with this guy, it was a few months later. And I remember feeling very much like I didn't know what was normal behavior for a man. And I think, and this is kind of probably something we'll talk about later in the podcast, but I had no idea what was okay or normal behavior or acceptable or and I was talking to a friend of mine about this guy I had been dating, and I was like, oh, he's really handsy, and I don't know if that's normal, and I don't know if is he a deviant, I don't know. And so we're just like talking about it, and I kid you not, I feel like I had a really strong spiritual experience where, this feeling came over me, and I just felt like, at the time I felt like it was God. Now I think it was more just me, but I felt like God was saying, Michelle, it's okay. That's totally normal. It's healthy. It's, human behavior. And from that moment on, I never questioned. I never doubted. I was never scared or, I don't know. I was never scared or afraid of sexuality and men and their deviant behavior.
So it's kind of a sexual empowerment, kind of a sexual awakening for you.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was more just I finally got to the point where I was like, you know what, it's okay. If there is a God, and at that time I still really believed in God, I don't think that he cares. I don't think that he cares if we are sexual. I'm a responsible adult, and these are people that I cared about. So yeah. Okay.
Kristin, are you comfortable talking about when kind of things started going wrong for you?
Yeah, sure. For me, well, it sounds a little similar. Well, not really, but kind of we have similar ages, Michelle, with certain things. But for me, a real turning point where I started saying these messages are not good for functioning adults whatsoever, was after I had been through a sexual assault, and I went to my bishop for some support and was put under discipline for that. And so, and that's something that is really, it was really, I hate saying it, but it's weird to say it. I still hesitate, but I'm glad it happened, because it woke me up to start going, this is not good. Not only is there not training for these men who are, vast majority are such good people, but the sexuality messaging is so harmful in the culture at large, but specifically within Mormonism. And there's a lot of good too. I really do believe that. But we're leaving out some pretty fundamental pieces that are not equipping us to migrate really difficult subjects and topics. And I have no doubt whatsoever that that situation led me to where I'm at today in my profession. And I cannot be upset about that because I have the coolest job in the whole world. But that was a moment where I had a fundamental shift in deferring to authority for what I needed to do and what was okay with my body. And so, yeah.
So you experienced a sexual assault and you were given discipline for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
How does that work?
In all the wrong ways. You know?
What would make a bishop want to punish someone for that?
Well, so rape culture, you know, it blames the victim. It says, why were you there? Why were you doing this? You shouldn't have been there. And so there were circumstances around it that he disagreed with. And so he felt like, you know, that needed to be addressed versus the blatant, come on, dude. Like it was a real ball dropped big time, you know, and
yeah, I'm so sorry.
Sorry,
Kristin.
Thank you.
Really quickly, one of our listeners, Dehlin, writes, my experience was that the people in my life who talked about sex the most was the church. A whole lot of punishment for having thoughts on a subject that I kept hearing about every Sunday. Thank you, Dehlin. That's a really good point. Yep. Ryan, when did your church and sexuality start going wrong for you?
I might frame it a little bit differently. I'd say it was never really fully right. I mean, basically, like I was saying, we're pre-programmed for these feelings. You know, it was never something that was fully comfortable. You kind of put up with it. You did your best. You kind of worked through it, all in the name of, okay, this is for blessings. And just to kind of paint a picture on perspective, if you're a believing single member of the church, you have two options. Or if you're obedient, I should say, you've got number one, you're not going to have sex. It's abstinence. That's your option. Or number two, you could have eternal temple marriage. Those are the two options that you have in front of you, and both of them are extreme. And neither of them is easy to do. It's not easy to be completely abstinent. It's not easy to, have clean thoughts all the time, and it's not easy to have temple marriage. So you're kind of stuck in this in between, and I kind of want to paint a picture of, kind of what Michelle was even alluding to, where it kind of puts you a little bit, you're behind. You're kind of an infant in that you don't know a lot of things. And I could talk about a lot of things here, but I just want to throw out a few examples. And I wish I wasn't making some of these things up, but because of these two extremes, you're kind of put in a position of, well, I don't quite want to sin, but I still kind of want to, push the limits and, things that aren't mentioned in the Strength of Youth. I mean, you've got LDS singles who are, they're looking at, well, is oral sex? They'll try and redefine sex. Does oral count? They're just saying, hey, oral is moral. Or, they'll do things like, instead of, okay, just kissing, we'll have what's called DHing, dry humping, things like, okay, well, body on body movement, things like that. Kind of trying to redefine what sex is, pushing the limits. And I got to make mention too, there's a funny video out there. If you haven't seen it yet, it's worth watching, from Garfunkel and Oates. You guys know which one I'm talking about? Where they try to redefine what sex is. In fact, I'm trying to remember the dang name of it, but the idea is, hey, I want to stay pure and clean, but at the same time, I want to please my man. So these two girls say, hey, we found a loophole, which is basically Jesus's loophole is I can have anal sex, which isn't sex. And so you get kind of these weird redefinitions, and that comes out of that struggle of just not being able to, have, like I said, staying completely abstinent or eternal marriage. Those are both difficult things to accomplish.
Yeah, and just so people know that Ryan isn't just making that up, when I was working for MIT, I traveled around the world, and at an international conference I was attending, I met a non-Mormon teacher from California who taught at a junior college. And for some reason, she had several LDS students who attended her classes at the junior college. And she told me very specifically that she had conversations with these girls that basically said, I want to get married in the temple, so I allow my fiance to have anal sex with me so that they can be pleasured, so that we can be temple worthy. And this was coming from a totally external source. Now, Kristin, as a sex therapist, are there problems with this?
People are resourceful, I think. And so you're asking, is there a problem with just trying to do anything you can to just not do that one thing?
Maybe that, but also can there be health, if you're not educated, can there be health risks with anal sex, for example?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's health risks in all sexual acts, really. Right. And often people don't understand what can be contracted in what way. And also there's safer ways to practice or enjoy anal sex and other things. And so just not knowing those things or not feeling like you can educate yourself, because that would be like pre-contemplating or whatever, and so they're a lot of times just exposed to much higher risk of contracting something or harming themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was Ryan's point, that the church delays. Okay, so the good news is most of you or all of you made it to your mid-20s without, pregnancy, STIs, a lot of the problems that parents want their kids to avoid. Sounds like the cost of that is what Ryan was saying, is that your development as a healthy adult in terms of sexuality can be really delayed. And the ignorance that comes from not feeling like you're allowed to learn about sexuality can leave you vulnerable to increased health risks and wellness risks and probably even assault risks, because there is no young women's lesson on consent, for example. Is that probably true?
Yes, I think that's true still.
Yeah.
Paul, how about you? When did things start going awry for you?
I would say that I first started, sort of realizing that maybe this mold wasn't ideal for me, probably in my mission, but I wouldn't allow myself to think that that any of that was an actual option. So I proceeded within the cookie cutter mold into marriage, and then through that, just forcing myself into that paradigm.
Okay.
So it wasn't until after that I started actually, waking up, I guess.
And learning. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk just briefly about the single scene. What can any of you have stories or share stories about just, what it's like to date as a single Mormon or a post-Mormon along the Wasatch Front or not along the Wasatch Front, but are there unhealthy practices or side effects to all these 20 to 30 somethings or more trying to live the law of chastity as adults, other than what we've already talked about? Any stories? And Michelle, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think everybody's affected differently, and I think this affects some people more than it affects others. But there is this desperation to get married because, like Ryan was saying, you have two options. You literally are expected to have zero sexual outlets, or get married. I mean, those are kind of your two options. And so there's this desperation, I think, that is within the community where you just really want to get married so that you can experience sexuality, so that you can have sex. And I think, there are the people who are, doing the crazy things like anal sex. But for the most part, when you're an active, studious, true believing Mormon, you might be doing some things that are maybe the brethren wouldn't approve of, but for the most part, you really don't have much of a sexual outlet. So yeah, I think that desperation is prevalent and pervasive and can be a problem.
Michelle, was there ever can you describe what the impact was for you to not have a sexual outlet at one point or another? I mean, I would guess many Mormon leaders would say, good, don't have a sexual outlet until you're married. It's not good. But is there a downside? What was the downside for you in terms of not having an outlet?
I think, and once again, everyone's experience is going to be different. I think for me, it was more embarrassment. Like, it was more about, I was a rule follower, so I was okay with following the rules, but there was definitely a sense of embarrassment. And I remember, and I don't know if this is kind of where you wanted to head, but I just remember being at a cousin's wedding, and I was talking to two of her friends who were married, and, my cousin's getting married in the temple. And so they were talking about sex, and they were talking about how, I wonder how it's going for her. And I just had nothing to contribute to the conversation. And I kind of wanted to stay quiet because I maybe mysterious, and then maybe they wouldn't know, maybe they might think that I had sex. And so I just didn't really want them to know. And so I wasn't really contributing to the conversation. So there's this sense of shame about it for sure. And it's not just outside of the church. I mean, outside of the church, when you're with non-members, they can't believe that you're waiting till marriage to have sex. But even within the church, when you're speaking to fellow members, there's shame associated with the fact that you are, as sexually experienced as maybe a stereotypical or typical 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 15-year-old, whatever it may be.
Chelsea, one of our listeners, writes, speaking to what Margi just mentioned as to the shame element, that was the most damaging aspect for myself, and the one that we were most conscious of not to inflict on our children. I think the older I get and more aware I am of myself, the more I realize how the shame was such a part of my teen years, even if I didn't know the words for it then. So that, Margi, you're prescient. The shame aspect is coming up for a lot of people.
It's unfortunate.
Okay, Kristin, for you, was there any personal side effect or consequence to not having a sexual outlet?
Well, yeah, I think and just kind of going off of what Michelle just said, I completely agree with what she said. And I think that the issue, at least for me, and I know for a lot of my friends and certainly a lot of my clients, it's this like underlying perception that you don't have legitimacy yet. Like, even if you have had experiences, but everyone thinks that you should be without, any sexual experience. I mean, I've been at bridal showers or bachelorette parties or those types of things where some of my single friends, I know darn well they have stuff to contribute to their friends, to the conversation, but they won't say anything because they're not married. They just don't feel like it's shame. They don't feel like their opinion's legitimate, or that they'll be judged because they have had sex or whatnot, or just whatever their experience might be. And so I think I have seen that in a lot of domains, and specifically around sexuality topics, but there's this constant yearning to feel legitimate, and legitimacy is only offered within marriage.
Got it. Ryan, how about you? Any consequences of not having a sexual outlet for you that were negative? Ryan, you're
frustration.
Go ahead. Start over. Your microphone wasn't working, but it's working now. Go ahead.
You got me? Okay.
Yeah.
There's absolutely a lot of frustration. I mean, like I said, you're kind of put in this pressure cooker of, okay, marriage is my way out of this. You have to kind of graduate to that level. And you kind of alluded to it earlier, how, just experiences dating on the Wasatch Front. You end up starting to, the older you get, the more pressure you get. I mean, Brigham Young himself, he said, hey, if you're 25 and you're not married, you are a menace to society. You start to, you participate in the single scene. It really starts to wear on you, where the older you get, you see your friends getting married, they're moving off. All of a sudden, hey, my friend's already been married and divorced and married again with kids, and I'm still single, trying to, push forward and progress. And it starts to wear on you a little bit of, hey, what is wrong with me? What am I doing in my life? And so, if you're not kind of hitting kind of those blessings, people get up, and bear their testimony of like, hey, I'm so thankful. I've been so blessed. And, here the singles are looking back and like, okay, am I cursed? I'm not getting these blessings. What's the issue here? So yeah, there's absolutely a lot of frustration, and, you try to find outlets for that. And, you try and look at dating opportunities, and you start to question, well, am I limiting who am I dating? I kind of look back at my dating experiences where, you kind of have that goal of, okay, I'm getting eternal marriage or nothing. That was the goal. And so I had some very quality, attractive girls that I kind of rejected. And because they didn't fit kind of that mold, I'm like, okay, I don't see the long-term there. So I rejected some opportunities. And honestly, if I can go back in time, I'd kick my own ass at some of the opportunities that I missed just from that limited viewpoint that I had. So yeah, to answer your question, it was very frustrating.
Because they weren't active Mormons?
Because they didn't fit the prerequisites of eternal marriage. They weren't active Mormons. It was like, okay, I don't see the long-term potential here, and the long-term potential is all that I'm looking for. It drastically limited who I dated. And so my dating pool got smaller and smaller, and we'll talk about this hopefully later, where now it's like, I'm the opposite.
Right.
The pool is very big. The universe is big. So I think we'll talk about some of those things. But at the time, it's like, man, it's so limited. And that's where the frustration really starts to mount.
Paul, in just a second, I'm going to ask you about how this affects someone going into a marriage, these messages on sexuality. But before I do that, what if somebody were to say, hey, plenty of single men and female Mormons along the Wasatch Front, what's wrong with you guys? Why couldn't you just get married? What are just some blatant responses to people who would just say, what's wrong with you? Everyone else seems to be getting married. Why not you? I know that's deeply offensive language, but I want to just hit head on people's questions about like, what's the big deal? Why has it been so hard?
Well, it's not always hard for everybody, right? So I think just because we're not married yet doesn't mean that it's hard. It just means we haven't either been in a place to get married, or we haven't found the right person. And especially
haven't wanted to, right?
Or haven't wanted to. I know through my 20s, like that wasn't really something that I wanted. And, I think everybody has their different stages of life or things that they want to experience in life. There's definitely a story in Utah, and, you get married young, you have 3 or 4 kids by the time you're 30. Not everybody was meant to live that story and to fit that mold. Maybe there is something wrong with us. Maybe we need to work through some things, maybe there's something wrong with everybody who gets married at 21 and they're just going to work through it in a different way. So, there's plenty of opportunity. I actually think that within the church and without, you could, if you're active Mormon, there were opportunities probably for all of us to get married if that was all we were really looking for, was to get married. But you don't always find somebody that you want to marry, so. Yeah.
Kristin, what would your answer be to my offensive question?
It's just so freaking pathologizing, right? Like,
yeah, totally.
Like what's wrong with you? And I know you're not saying this, but that is such a common question.
Mm-hmm.
Why aren't you married? You went to 2 BYU institutions. Why aren't you married? I think there's just within the culture, there's such a heavy laden just pressure that once you get married, you've made it.
Yeah.
And if you're not, then something must be wrong with you. When in actuality, the dating scene, especially, I know this is very Utah centric, Gina, but this is the Wasatch Front story. That's largely my experiences too. But it is so complicated with why one might not be married and why one might be. And there's a lot of cultural things there too that are kind of entertaining, but it's just really, really complicated. And not everybody gets married at 21. And not everyone wants to, like Michelle said.
Mm-hmm.
Kristin, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Margi, I think we've talked about this. Aren't there data that suggests that it's not necessarily beneficial to get married early? Are you aware of research that suggests benefits of waiting even into your early 30s to get married?
For marriage, I think, yeah. I don't know the exact research right now, but there's also, increasing research right now that early sexual experiences contributes specifically to women, like wanted experiences helps develop further sexual well-being, which affects heavily global well-being of the woman. And so that's just, they're producing research over and over and over now showing that.
Which makes sense to me, actually, because as you're talking, I'm actually relating to a lot of the things that you're saying, because even having married at 22, I came in with zero knowledge of my own sexual being. I had nothing to contribute, no. And to me, that
feels... You have things to contribute.
Very straightforward things to contribute. But I mean, as with regard to me and helping and to really like that self-knowledge and self-awareness, I just feel like, it was, and not only that, but also to have it all switch on a dime where it's inappropriate, don't entertain it, and then bam, you've got the golden ticket, go to it. And I just think psychologically, it's problematic on a number of levels. How we talk about and how we approach sexuality for those that even follow the model. Those that follow the model, oftentimes there's a kickback later.
Absolutely.
Anyway.
Absolutely. I talk about it's like honeymoon trauma.
Right.
With my clients, like they really, and I laugh, but it's not funny. They really have some consequences from it being a completely different ballgame than they were ever even thinking or prepared for.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So really quickly, Michelle writes, I grew up in a different type of Christian church, and the experiences of me and my peers were almost identical to your panelists. So it's fun to have a never Mormon validate that we're not alone in our sexual dysfunction as Mormons. Now, Paul, I don't want to assume that there were problems, with your former wife in terms of sexuality, but what can you talk about how getting married, especially in terms of how prepared you were for sexuality, isn't necessarily the holy grail or utopia once you actually do dive into that marriage? Do you feel like you were sexually prepared for a healthy, happy marriage, or were there issues that you're comfortable talking about? I know it's a private, personal
Sure.
question.
Yeah. I mean, I can speak in generalities. I mean, when you get married at 23, you don't really need a lot to have fun. I mean, you're 23 years old. So, that satisfies things for a while, but you're a kid though. I mean, that's the bottom line. And I was a kid and just emotionally and immature and sexually zero experience. That ultimately over the course of, time leads to issues.
Yeah. We think, and this is the way, I think Margi and I both came to our marriage having never really had any sexual experimentation, and certainly as virgins. And I guess I wonder if there's a benefit to having some experience prior to marriage. And I can think of sort of two possibilities. One is you bring more sexual skill to the marriage that then can help make the sex life in the marriage more enjoyable and more satisfying. But the other is, what if you go into marriage just sort of like wondering what you missed out on and wondering what you could have had and feeling like you didn't actually get to healthily explore? I imagine that could have its own set of challenges or issues, both because you maybe aren't compatible with who you're married to, because you have no idea of knowing what you're compatible with or who you're compatible with or what your compatibilities are. And then also just this idea of arrested development where you're like, what did I miss out on? How could things have been different? And if at some point that kind of haunts you with this curiosity and this fascination about sexuality outside of marriage, because you didn't get enough of sort of exploration in the normal formative years.
Right.
Does anybody have anything to say about that, or am I just projecting my own stuff?
I'll just add on your comment of just that sexual compatibility. I remember when I was a missionary. Here I am, 19 years old. We had an older woman. She was probably like 80 years old, non-member. But I remember her specifically saying, you guys haven't had sex, and you're planning on not having sex until you get married. I can't think of a crazier thing. And that stuck in my head for years. In fact, it still rings to me. And she specifically said, how can you marry somebody if you don't even know you're sexually compatible? And at the time, I didn't even know what that meant. It's like, okay, well, I'm a virgin missionary. I don't even know what sexual compatibility means. I'm trying to visualize in my head, well, does that mean personality, physically, what we like, don't like? It was just such a foreign world to me. So yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, where, kind of going back and remembering the times of like, from the virgin mindset, you don't know what you don't know. And in some ways, can hold you back.
I love it. Hey, our buddy Heath is giving us a nice compliment, panelists. He says, kudos to the panelists for so bravely discussing this issue. I fear that top church leaders have never heard anything so frank. They're used to youth and young adults telling them what they want to hear, the confession, etc., rather than the honest yearnings and concerns. Great job, guys and gals. Love and respect. As a parent of teens, thank you. So kudos from Heath. Thanks, Heath. Good to hear from you. Okay, so
hey, John,
yeah, please.
Could I,
Paul?
I think the easiest way for me to probably, since I think I was the only one that was married and now out and single, the easiest way for me to explain it or describe it is that I had zero sexual compatibility issues with my ex-wife. The chemistry was great, and yet I still acted out, and I'll just leave it at that. But there were, in generalities, I still acted out. That wouldn't happen, I don't think, if I chose to get married, because you go in with your eyes wide open, and you do the things that you should do in any normal relationship, or I have done, and then it's easier to have a happier relationship that way.
So are you kind of saying that sometimes sexual dissatisfaction in a marriage or incompatibility can be the result of just not entering the marriage sexually mature? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah.
That sexual immaturity leads to the risk of acting out.
Right. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be a sexual compatibility issue. At least in my case, it can just be
immaturity.
Immature. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me, is it Erickson, the stages where he talks about things you have to resolve at certain kind of times? And sometimes it reminds me of that oftentimes, that there's like a developmental time for these things. And if they're not addressed, or if they're put to sleep or kind of latent, then oftentimes they reappear later for you to sort of handle later. And it can feel quite blindsiding. And it is something that we see, quite a bit.
We want to encourage you, if you have ideas for topics, if you have comments on past episodes, if you have ideas for future guests, please email us at mormonstories@gmail.com, and we would love to entertain your ideas. If you're listening to this interview now on Facebook, please feel free to post comments or questions on the live stream on the Mormon Stories podcast Facebook page, and we can incorporate your comments and questions into our live discussion. That makes these things fun. And then if you're not comfortable doing that, you can email your questions or comments anonymously to mormonstories@gmail.com. and we would love to incorporate them into current or future shows. Okay, so that is enough with the introductions. How are you feeling today?
Good. I'm excited for today's topic.
You are?
Yeah. How about you?
Is that because you're planning on becoming single soon?
No.
No? So why the
No.
excitement, Margi?
Well,
I'm
I have
kidding.
2 daughters that are
That's true.
navigating
That's
these
true.
waters right
We
now.
do have 2 single Mormon daughters. 3, actually. All right. Well, sort of Mormon. All right. So let's begin, and let's introduce our illustrious panel. We are really excited to have them today. So we have 4 people joining us today. The first is Kristin Marie, Kristin or post-Mormon. Before we jump into that, we want to just have a few quick announcements. I want to remind you guys that we have a workshop coming up in Fort Collins, Colorado, May 4th through 5th. It's going to be fun and meaningful, and we're going to help a lot of people. If you're interested in that, or we have a retreat coming up in Salt Lake City, June 23rd through 25th. That's going to be amazing. And then we have a workshop July 7th, 2017 on healthy relationships and healthy sexuality with our very own Natasha Helfer-Parker. And I think Kristin Marie is going to be there as well. I'm not sure. Kristin, are you going to be it? Yes or no? No, just Natasha? She doesn't know. Okay. So regardless, check out mormontransitions.org/events, and you can check out our event calendar. We would love to have you guys support us. We want to thank everyone who donates to Mormon Stories, Mormon Transitions, A Thoughtful Faith, Mormon Matters. Please know that your donations make all this possible. If you have been enjoying this series, please do support it, because your donations make it possible. Just $10 or $20 a month on a recurring basis can keep this sort of thing alive. So please donate. It's really easy. You can do it with credit card. You can do it over PayPal, however you want.
My company contracts with hospital systems to go in and help them run their revenue cycle, just, increase revenue, cut costs, improve processes. And I've been doing that for a number of years. And then, like John was saying, I'm one of the moderators for Single Mormon Transitions, which is a group started by John Dehlin about a year ago. It's almost been a year, not quite a year. And if anybody is interested in, joining that group, it's a secret group right now. So you kind of have to go through we have a landing page, a landing site where you can go to on Facebook called Single Mormon Transitions landing page and ask to join there. I don't have any dogs, no animals. So.
Well, we're happy to have you, Michelle. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Paul Smith, this is your first time, I think, on Mormon Stories podcast. Correct me if I'm wrong, but please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Paul Smith. I'm a personal injury attorney in Fresno, California. I'm divorced, 3 kids. In my spare time, I like to go to concerts and go to Mormon Transitions retreats. So that's what I do in my spare time.
Thanks for the plug. We'll pay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. I'm your host, John Dehlin, and my co-host is
Margi Dehlin.
And we are very, very excited to have you join us for another edition of Mormon Stories Live podcast, where we focus on practical issues with the panel. So Mormon Stories does single interviews that are long form, and then we also sometimes have panels to discuss interesting issues. It's part of what we've been calling our Mormon Transitions series. It is March 28th, 2017, and today we have a very exciting topic for all of you. It's being Mormon and single and how sexuality interfaces with that. We're going to be covering, having never been married in Mormon and being single and sexuality. And we're also going to cover sort of sexuality after divorce as a single Mormon. Kristin has been on Mormon stories, Mormon transitions in the past. She's helped us out with retreats and workshops. Kristin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
My name is Kristin Marie.
Okay, Kristin, go ahead. You're muted. Try that again.
My name is Kristin Marie Benyon. I think we're supposed to say I'm a practicing therapist, sex therapist in Orem, Utah. I own a practice there, working primarily with a lot of couples and singles around sexuality issues all along the spectrum of belief in Mormonism. And I live in Bluffdale, and I have a dog who's awesome. His name's Murphy.
Oh, cute name too.
Yeah.
And you're single.
Yes, I am. Well, I think so. Yeah, I am.
And you've
Just
dated.
yeah. What?
And you've dated.
I have dated. Yes, I have a history there. Yeah.
Okay, so you're both an interviewee and an expert.
I'm wearing a couple hats.
All right. Well, welcome, Kristin. It's always great to have you.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Michelle Ross. Michelle is a moderator of a very important group. But Michelle, why don't you introduce yourself and then tell us about the group you moderate?
Yeah, hi. I am Michelle and I live in Salt Lake City. I work in healthcare operations. So